because this is where we kind of crush the typical BlackRock conspiracy theories that you've probably seen all over YouTube and Reddit and wherever else. This is where the finance bros are all screaming that BlackRock doesn't actually own the shares, and that's kind of correct. But let's start by just meeting the big three.
Conspiracy theories are dangerous.
Information is the oxygen of a democracy.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. Although State Street is actually owned by BlackRock now, so it's kind of awkward. But anyways, these guys are investment management firms, and you probably are invested with them. At least if you're old enough and well off enough to have any sort of retirement account or investment savings account or anything like that. Maybe if you dabble in buying ETFs or index funds or the like. The big three mostly manage other people's money for them. They invested across wide sweeping portfolios of stocks to just like minimize risk and make your wealth grow slowly over time without, losing it all. Vanguard pioneered this mutual fund model decades ago, and then BlackRock elevated it with popularization of index and exchange traded funds. So now you buy a share of, let's say, BlackRock's Voltron 3000 fund or whatever. I just made that up. BlackRock's Voltron 3000 fund has a whole bunch of shares of 3,000 different companies all across the markets in its portfolio. And you have a tiny little slice of that portfolio and of its profit or loss, right? So because your risk is now spread out across 3,000 different stocks, you're not going to lose it all when Circuit City goes bankrupt because you thought it was going to go to the moon. But you also won't get rich when GameStop does go to the moon. So, whatever. They don't really want you getting rich anyways. So it's true, though. Most of the money that the big three manage is not their own money. Most of it is actually our retirement accounts, like trillions of dollars of our retirement accounts. So all the halfwits out there that just accept what they're told in business school as like gospel fact think, oh, nothing to see here. It's all good, bro. BlackRock doesn't actually own any of these companies. They're just holding it for us. Like, right? Sort of. You can look this up for yourself. It's not hard to figure out when you buy a share of a mutual fund or an index fund or an exchange traded fund, all the types of products that the big three are selling, you sign over your voting rights to the fund managers, to BlackRock. Sure, they are managing your money, but they are also managing your voting power. You are now a beneficial owner of a share of their fund, not the underlying shares of the corporations they are investing in on your behalf. And so, when we say that BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street own 42% of all the shares in the top 100 companies on the market, that means that they control 42% of the voting power. Add in their buddies, and the top 25 financial institutions control 83% of the voting power. That means they control all of these companies. They pick the boards of directors. They pick the policies. They decide how things are going to run, when companies will do share buybacks or dividends, all the rest of it. Obviously, they're not all powerful, but by the rules of their own game, they've basically got it all locked down. And perhaps most subtle and sinister of all, this changes the nature of capitalism in a fundamental way. Because fiduciary duty is a legal term binding these companies and their chief officers to act in the best interest of their shareholders. And honestly, this makes perfect sense. The whole point of a public company is that this company serves our whole community or country or state or whatever it is, and we can all buy into it and have a say in how it's run. And in exchange for taking our investment money, they have a duty to do what's best for us, the investors. But that's not how the world works today. We are not the investors that they are beholden to anymore. Now, all of these companies' fiduciary duty is to the bankers and the fund managers and the Larry Finks of this world. They are legally bound to do what is best for them, not for you. And if it's best for them to sell baby food with 177 times the legal amount of lead in it, well, they're gonna do it. If it's best for them to sell you untested pharmaceutical products, then they're gonna do it. If they'll make more money filling the food with drugs and poisons, not only are they gonna do it, they are legally obligated to. It's their fiduciary duty, and they can actually be fired if they don't. But now, real quick, we cannot talk about BlackRock without also mentioning the genie in the bottle. Larry Fink's financial supercomputer, Aladdin. So Aladdin stands for Asset, Liability, and Debt and Derivative Investment Network. He just wanted a cool name. And it is one of the oldest financial computer systems and artificial intelligence systems on the planet. It began all the way back in 1988 as mostly a pipe dream. Larry Fink's vision for how computing could revolutionize financial markets. And oh boy, was he right. So Aladdin is sort of a supercomputer that monitors billions and billions of trades and assets and investments across global markets and constantly is assessing and reassessing risk. It's more often used to monitor risk on a portfolio of assets rather than to actually trade in the market, but its use cases are vast and ever expanding. Aladdin is the largest AI system operating the financial markets today by a wide margin, at least as best as I can understand, but there isn't a lot of oversight or reporting on the topic, so I'm not really sure that we would even know if the CIA or someone else had some other supercomputer running behind the scenes. But Aladdin is the biggest that we know of right now. Because it's not just BlackRock that uses Aladdin. Although BlackRock does sport somewhere in the ballpark of $11 trillion worth of assets of its own that Aladdin helps oversee, all the way back in 2000, they started selling Aladdin's services to other firms. And because BlackRock does not publicly disclose its client lists either, no one really knows exactly how much of the market Aladdin monitors and manages. But in 2020, the Financial Times produced one of the most substantial reports to date about the platform and reported that, quote, Vanguard and State Street Global Advisors, the largest fund managers after BlackRock, are users, as are half of the top 10 insurers by assets, as well as Japan's $1.5 trillion government pension fund, the world's largest, Apple, Microsoft, and Google's parent firm Alphabet, the three biggest U.S. public companies, all rely on the system to steward hundreds of billions of dollars in their corporate treasury investment portfolios. The report claimed that only counting 1/3 of Aladdin's 240 clients, just those clients represented a balance sheet of $21.6 trillion in assets under management. The entire GDP of the United States is only about $27 trillion. So if just 1/3 of Aladdin's clients represent $21 trillion, one can only assume that Aladdin is overseeing somewhere in the ballpark of $50 to $60 trillion of assets across most of the world's biggest banks and financial institutions and public companies and, oh yeah, and the government. A lot of people don't know that BlackRock is in the government bailout business. All the way back in 2008, the Federal Reserve came to them, it came to Larry Fink specifically because he had kind of invented the whole mortgage-backed security thing that was destroying the entire global financial system, but it's a little more complicated than that. It's a long story, another day. So anyways, the Fed back in 2008 goes to Larry and asks him to help them out with his supercomputer Aladdin and tell them how to spend all of our taxpayer bailout money that we never voted to give to them. And then Aladdin distributed it to all of Larry's buddies and whatnot and saved the world. Such a great guy. I'm sure that Aladdin was entirely impartial and that those bailouts didn't directly benefit BlackRock in any particular way. At least, I hope not, because the Fed went back to Larry in 2020 when the coronavirus hit, and they asked Larry and his boy Aladdin to help fix the markets again. So, BlackRock, who sells all sorts of financial products like shares of exchange-traded funds that they manage, advised the government on how to invest billions of dollars of COVID bailout money. But I am sure, of course, again, that there was no conflict of interest there at all. It's all good. Aladdin, it's worth noting, is just one of the AI agents currently acting upon and determining how vast swaths of the market will trend and function. There are hundreds, thousands of other bots and AI algorithms and Palantir black magic, you name it. The market has not been entirely or even mostly human in a long time. But anyways, bit of a tangent about robots taking over the world. So to summarize so far, BlackRock is one of the biggest money managers in the world. They invest other people's money by making these various funds that you buy into, and they hold the stocks for everyone. But then they wind up holding so much of the stock of the whole market that they have the biggest share of vote at every corporate election all across all of the biggest American businesses. Because remember, They vote pretty much all the shares that they manage. That includes trillions of dollars of all of America's retirement accounts that get invested in these funds. That's all of regular America's shared saved wealth. All the bottom 95% of us, or whatever number. And whereas that percentage of the capital in the American markets is supposed to be representing us and our interests, it winds up representing Larry and his buddies and their agendas for the markets and for their bank accounts. And Larry is well known for his policy of pushing markets and companies to make changes that he wants. He spent a good chunk of the last decade pushing everyone towards versions of ESG and DEI in very overt and real ways.
You now make a point of that's an investment criteria for you.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. 54% of the incoming class are women. We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year, and what we are doing internally is if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted. Okay,
we're doing the same thing.
And so it's just you have to force behaviors, and if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted. And that's not recruiting, it is development, as Ken said. And ultimately, it's still going to take time, but I am just as much shocked as Ken is that we have not seen more opportunities, and we're going to have to force change.
So, that's how Larry feels about his seat at the top of the markets and the power that he wields. And he was the champion of ESG and of DEI for the last 10 years. And that was what he was talking about. He was talking about forcing companies to be more DEI using his share voting rights as leverage. Or your compensation or even your job might change, right? Because BlackRock votes all of those shares in Larry's and his advisors and friends and allies' interests, every executive knows that they likely only have a job if they go along with Larry's broader agenda. Otherwise, he and his buddies can easily just team up and kick you out of the club. And that's how you get to a big club that you are not in. And when you start mapping out the club, as in mapping out the board of directors of each of these companies, you start to notice some patterns. You start to notice connections. Mostly, you just start learning a lot of wild stuff about how the world really works. Take, for example, the board of BlackRock. This map actually hasn't been updated since last year. They added Bill Demchak, who is a triathlete. And it actually sounds pretty cool, honestly. He comes from PNC, which is a gigantic bank, and he recruited from his employees for an Ironman triathlon team. Granted, that was like 10 years ago now. All the articles about it are behind paywalls that I'm not paying for, but that's dope, you know? Nice job for not being a lazy millionaire, bro. They also added Adebayo Ogunlesi. Adebayo Ogunlesi? Sorry, bro, about your name. I mean about me pronouncing it. I don't know much of anything about him yet, obviously. Haven't done the dive, but I can't help but notice that he came from Credit Suisse First Boston. And if you don't know what happened to Credit Suisse and how a chain reaction from the GameStop squeeze rippled all the way up to collapsing one of the world's most important banks and nearly toppling the whole global system, wild rabbit hole. Look up what happened at Archegos Capital Management. But anyways, that's Adebayo. The rest of this web is pretty interesting, and they are all current. This is the hottest booth in the club. This is like that front row, poppin' champagne, billionaire lifestyles club. Whatever things they want, they got it. This table is one of the most influential in the world. There's plenty of other tables out there with plenty of sleazy billionaires sitting at them, but this one is not far from the top, I would reckon. On the left, in a straight row, you have Susan Wagner, Rob Capito, and Larry Fink, 3 of the 5 original founders. Bottom left, a little cluster that includes Marco Antonio Slim Domit, the son of Carlos Slim, the richest man in Mexico. I'm sure that relationship comes with all sorts of interesting connections and influences and exchange of favors behind the scene between Larry Fink and BlackRock, its other board members, and the Slim family. After all, who do you think really runs Mexico? Do you think it's their elected leader or the super rich banker? And I'm just throwing out a wild guess here, but I would assume that the richest banker in Mexico probably knows a thing or two about the cartels and all sorts of other powerful people down there. Just pure speculation. And while we're here, I'll also point out Fabrizio Freda. He's been the president and CEO of Estee Lauder since 2009, and he is apparently retiring at the end of fiscal year 2025. And if you don't know about Estee Lauder, let's just say that the Lauders have some very powerful friends. Like, for example, Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, who you can see at the very bottom above the red logo for The Economist. She's on the board of Estee Lauder, along with Fabrizio. Lynn Forrester is the CEO, I should say Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, is the CEO and director of E.L. Rothschild LLC and has been on the board of Estee Lauder since 2000. The Rothschilds have a good bit of history with the Lauders. Both also have a good deal of old history with various aspects of organized crime in America and obviously countless lifelong connections to the state of Israel. Whitney Webb authored a really good article that you can find on Mint Press News about Ronald Lauder's various connections to and through the Mega Group, which is a very hush-hush group of Jewish billionaires that had numerous ties to Epstein. When you zoom out on the club, you start to see how many of these guys hop between and occupy multiple board positions at various companies in the club. All of these lines that are crisscrossing between the clusters are various places where someone is in 2 seats at once or more. And these are just among the relatively small number of companies that I've mapped out. The network of foundations and NGOs and corporations and colleges and nonprofits and everything else that these guys are climbing up through the ranks to put on their resume, the more I read about them, the more they just look like a ladder that everyone is climbing in their own personal way, trying to reach as high as possible towards some unattainable top of the game, which, to be fair, the board of BlackRock is pretty damn close to the top of that game. Because I would imagine that there's a sort of natural capitalistic hierarchy to the various seats at the various tables in this club. Certain tables are more powerful or prestigious than others. Each man and woman scrabbling to be the most shrewd or the most efficient, the most triathletic, or whatever the hell you think is going to keep you in the club climbing upwards. And so, as you start to look around, you can't help but notice things like how the former CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is on the board of Pfizer. And you read her bio real quick, and you might ask yourself, what is National Resilience Inc? I've never heard of that before. Must be important for the former CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to be involved, right? And so you get curious and you look it up and you realize that you have just found the company that manufactured most of the RNA material for the COVID shots all throughout the pandemic. I'm not sure if they're still involved or not, but I am sure that the CEO of the CIA's investment firm called In-Q-Tel was on the board alongside Ol Sue, which is extremely interesting because that rather directly implies that the CIA was rather directly involved in this company and whatever it is that they were doing. They didn't just invest in this company, they put their own In-Q-Tel CEO on the board, along with Sue Hellman. And along with Sue Hellman, there are also Palantir and FDA connections on this board, actually. It's a whole rabbit hole, and the implications are far-reaching and inspire a lot of interesting and sort of uncomfortable questions. You see, these are the kinds of things you start to notice and learn when you just start poking around in the club and learning stuff. Anyways, while we're at the board of Pfizer, both Pfizer and Resilience also have Scott Gottlieb, the former head of the FDA, on their board. The FDA is the government institution that is supposed to be regulating Pfizer and the vaccine industry. So, pop over to the board of Johnson & Johnson, And it only looks the normal amount of corrupt and sketchy, at least until you do a little extra research, gain a little extra context. And Macy Beckerel is that lady up at the top with the dark hair who used to work at the American Cancer Society and the NIH and all of these other health-related industries, science-related positions, all throughout her long career. Well, the vibe completely shifts when you learn that Johnson & Johnson knew for decades that their baby powder was contaminated with asbestos, and for decades, they actively covered it up. Not that they were ignorant, they actively covered it up and kept profiting off of poisoning babies. So, what good is a long career fighting cancer, Macy, when you preside over a company that is selling mothers baby powder full of asbestos? And listen, I don't know how involved in this cover-up Macy was, or if she even knew about it at all. I am just pointing out that in general, Johnson & Johnson does not stack their board of directors with people involved in the American Hospital Association and the American Cancer Society and the National Cancer Institute, the National Academy of Medicine, etc., 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 because they want to protect you from cancer. They stack their board this way because it makes them money. You start to research how and why that might be, and you'll wind up in all sorts of places, none of them good. Or at least not for you. All great for Alex Gorski, though. He was one of the industry's highest paid CEOs until he retired in 2022, raking in most years around $30 million. That was just a few years after it came out that his entire tenure and long before Johnson & Johnson had been keeping this asbestos scandal under wraps. J&J paid a $700 million fine, which was pennies compared to the profit, I am sure. It's just the tax that you got to pay sometimes for doing business in the fast and loose lane. And that's the lane that far too many of these people in the club live in. And these companies, generally doing whatever's necessary to make profit increase, is what shapes our world. Partly because all of their company's policies govern what we do, what we buy, how we live, how much our cell phone bill is, how much our medical bills are, what our water utilities cost, all sorts of things. But also, in a broader sense, they all are constantly sucking wealth up and out the top of this corporate matrix to deposit it in the accounts of their buddies at the top shareholders of these companies. Tactics like share buybacks allow the companies to pay out all the extra money that they're hoarding and distribute it to their shareholders, i.e. their bosses, the big banks, the investment firms, and the folks at BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. After COVID, when pharma companies had this magical windfall of billions and billions of taxpayer dollars, they all did stock buybacks, not just the pharma companies either. It's a way that these companies just shovel our nation's wealth into the accounts of all of the biggest financial institutions. On this graph, you can see the purple representing corporate dividends and green representing stock buybacks. The trend upwards over time is obvious. But you notice how all the buybacks surge right before 2008? Yeah. It's almost like they knew something was coming and they all loaded up before it. Even when it's taxpayer dollars paying for mandatory vaccines, which is paying for the most recent and biggest surge on the chart, represented from 2021 to 2022, they have no qualms about packing that away for later as well. So, anyways.
Conspiracy theories are dangerous.
Information is the oxygen of a democracy.
With Republicans, with progressives, with libertarians, because this is not about right and left, this is about right and wrong.
It's so sacred we can't talk about it.
Our security is at stake.